Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it's often that the scariest monsters that are out there are the ones that want to buy you a drink first. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm assuming you do because you're listening to us right now, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. It's all good. Plus, you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, that would be fantastic. Also, you can find us on the social media, as the kids call it. You can find us for all sorts of updates, either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One, to find out what's going on. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest movie news, television reviews, reviews, news, basically the moving image in general. Because that's what we love to talk about and write about it, and we love it when you come and read about it. So please stop on by. We had an interesting one on this episode. We're looking into the heart of darkness itself. We're looking at Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman, which is released on select screens for our neighbors to the south right now, and it's currently on a VOD and it's hitting DVD soon, and it is the story of Ted Bundy, but it takes a bit of a different tack to it. It's taking a lot of care in sort of not fictionalizing it or romanticizing it, and really sort of focusing on the case files and the police work. And it's the story of this specter who roams the highways of a gritty and decadent 1970s America, who's hunting for his next prey. Ted Bundy, played by Chad Michael Murray, and he's being tracked down by an intrepid female detective, Kathleen McKesney, played excellently by Holland Roden, working out of the Seattle Police Bureau, and a rookie FBI profiler named Robert Ressler, played by Jake Hayes. He's the man who coined the term serial killer, and this is a true story. Obviously the Ted Bundy story has been done before, but it's going off the case files. It's really sort of looking at the work that the law enforcement does, and it's a film that kind of shows not just the monster, but the human costs on the other side of the coin as well. It's a real interesting film, which I recommend you check out. And it was written and directed by Daniel Farrands, who we had the unique pleasure of sitting down and talking with. And he was a cool guy, and it was a good talk, and we really got into sort of the ethos of why we like to be scared, but why we don't like to be too scared, because the real world monsters are less terrifying than the Freddys and the Jasons and the Michael Myers of the world, but there's a relationship there that can't be denied, and we go into that, and it's a great talk. So I hope you enjoy that, and go check out Ted Bundy, American Boogeyman on VOD platforms now. All right, well, Daniel, first off, thanks for the time today, man. I appreciate this.
Yeah, no, David, thanks so much. I really appreciate it as well.
Now, I guess my first question is, because I was looking you up, I was doing my research.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed you'd started in documentary, but horror, and now you've almost transitioned to sort of horror recreationist.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit just about, what sort of birthed this version of the Ted Bundy story? Because it really felt like it was focusing very much on the case files as opposed to sort of trying to mythologize Ted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, because I really, that means a lot, because yes, more than anything, I did not want to fetishize, romanticize, glamorize, whatever versions of the word of eyes that we could come up with. I don't find anything alluring, appealing, or sympathetic about Ted Bundy. If anything, myself, Chad Michael Murray, and our creative team, we wanted to emphasize the monstrous qualities of this man, tragic though they may be, and certainly the horror he visited upon these young women and their families is, legendary unto itself, but not in a good way. So I wanted to pay respect to those people, but also I think tell a story that reminded us and maybe in a way put the final kind of punctuation mark on this, is that Ted Bundy was a monster who should never be held up in any regard other than he was a man who destroyed others' lives.
For sure.
But in terms of my, kind of, I guess you call transitioning into this, it was not a conscious decision on my part. I actually did start off making films. I'd written one of the Halloween films early in my career, and had done several other kind of horror thriller projects. But one of which I think people forget was called The Girl Next Door, based on a novel by Jack Ketchum.
Oh, that's
Incredibly
right. Yeah.
disturbing and controversial, but heartfelt, and another important story that I felt should be told. Certainly not for the faint of heart. And I think there are some people that sort of want to make assumptions about my position about these stories, that I fetishize them, or I don't. If anything, I think I'm afraid of what exists in the real world. And I think some of it is just trying to work that out. I grew up in the 70s as a small child, and I just remember these stories in the news or my parents talking about them. And it was a pretty scary time to grow up in this country. Not that today isn't, but in a slightly different way. Now killers will just, come up to you and murder you in a parking lot or in your high school.
Yeah.
And the level of violence has changed. But, back then it was the creeping unknown. It was who is it? And not feeling safe, whether it was, in your own home, especially. I think that's what Bundy really brought home to people, was that you're not safe in your own home. And it could be the guy that looks like he lives next door. Not that Ted Bundy, I think, was particularly attractive or particularly even smart or charismatic. I think he just knew how to blend in.
Yeah.
And I think that was presented one of the biggest challenges to law enforcement. And I think he was able to use those qualities to kind of prey upon the sympathies of these young women. They were raised to be decent, kind human beings who would help a stranger in need. And that's what he would use to exploit them.
No, and I mean, you're absolutely right, because I mean, it's one of those things that we tend to forget, that the truth has been and is scarier than fiction. But I mean,
Right.
these monsters that have existed in real life that have borne out sort of the Jasons and the Freddys and the Michael Myers of the into the sort of cinematic universe.
Right.
And I
Well, I
mean,
think there's something to be said there too. The fact that I would have been involved in some of these, kind of famous franchises for, all it's interesting to me. Like it's like the same audience that sort of, romanticizes a Freddy Krueger or a Jason Voorhees or a Michael Myers. They get very uncomfortable when
right.
it comes time to look at a Ted Bundy or a Charles Manson or even an O.J. Simpson. I think for some people, the reality becomes too much. And again, I'm not trying to draw parallels between these kinds of films. They're not. And I understand that there's horror for kind of fun and entertainment's sake, but it is interesting to me that the very people who will gladly run out to go see the, umpteenth Halloween film, kind of shy away or get, a little bit vocal about their displeasure about a movie about Ted Bundy.
No, and you're right. It's fascinating to see that people don't want that other side of the coin, but really one doesn't exist without the other. It's
in a weird way, I mean, I think there are some parallels between, American Boogeyman and even say the original Halloween, which came out in 1978, when all of this was kind of in the media. And I have wondered, if there was some influence, on part of the filmmakers that maybe not a conscious thing, but that this was all in the zeitgeist, stuff that was on the evening news every day, after Bundy had been captured in February of 1978. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of that made its way into, specifically the first Halloween. He was, Michael Myers was called the Boogeyman, and I think Ted Bundy really was that American boogeyman. He was the one that, that we feared being in the closet or under our bed. And he was actually doing these things.
No, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about just the research you had to do for American Boogeyman? Because it really does feel like you pulled from, survivor stories and sort of created them, as opposed to trying to sort of stitch together a narrative that,
Yeah.
that you wanted. Like you stitched together a narrative that felt probably as close to the truth as humanly possible.
I thank you again. I did. I did extensive research. A lot of it, I will say, did come from being riveted by the documentaries that aired in the past couple of years on both Netflix and Amazon. One was Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, which really I felt were, you really gave you insight. Joe Berlinger, who also did the extremely wicked, vile film with Zac Efron, directed this documentary. And who's, again, like myself, he's a documentarian who ended up, making feature films as well. But I think that was really brilliant. And the way that he was able to, again, stitch together these audio tapes that were made of Ted Bundy while he was in prison and kind of give it insight into his psychology. And then the other one was the Amazon documentary about Bundy's relationship with his longtime girlfriend and her, at the time, young daughter, whose lives were upended. And, and I think that horrifying realization that this man that they loved was this horrific murderer. Yeah. And I just felt that on an emotional level, that was really compelling. So I was really drawn to those. But in terms of the research, the story of Kathleen McChesney, the young Seattle homicide detective who was brought in to the case early on, task force. And her story was just very interesting. Her interviews and these documentaries and a couple of the other books that I read where she was quoted and kind of followed her story. I just found her to be such an interesting character in that she was, a woman in a very male-dominated profession at that time. She was a young rookie who, she wanted to be an FBI agent, and they legitimately told her. The FBI recruiter came to one of her classes when she was in the academy and said, "We don't hire female agents." So I wanted to depict that. And I also wanted to tell the story a little bit of Ted's mother, Louise, who was played by the brilliant Lynn Shay in our film. And just that sense of denial that she lived in until the end. Even when she heard her own son confess to these murders on tape, her reaction was, "Let's have apple pie and ice cream."
Right.
And I was like, what the hell? And it's just so sad. The whole thing is incredibly sad. And I wanted to draw upon that, but also I think on the incredible efforts of, and I think, in the film, McChesney is kind of a composite of a lot of different characters. And I took a little bit of the real McChesney and added, and as you have to when you're dramatizing something.
Of course, yeah.
You add bits and pieces of other things to create a full through line in a narrative. But I do hope people see that the film is about more than just a succession of murders, because I really wanted to, while we don't shy away from the monstrosity that was Ted Bundy, I think what we also show is the light and the real emotional effort that went into trying to track him down and bring him to justice.
No, because while people may sort of initially focus on Chad as Ted, the reality is Holland is the star here in this film.
Right.
Can you walk me through just sort of finding her, because she's such a linchpin for the film and does a great job.
Yeah, she came to me, and as a lot of things, it was a suggestion by our casting directors, Donald Pemrick and Dean Franck, who were wonderful, and they thought of her because they had known her from, and I remember her as well from Teen Wolf. And when I met Holland, I just was struck by her kind of every girl quality, but also that there was a grittiness to her. She's kind of got that Demi Moore kind of husky voice. There's something. She's got that spine, and you believe that she can. She's going to go to the mat to bring this guy to justice, and that there's an emotional part of the story for her and I really wanted the character, and I think Colin did it beautifully, which was she was going to be the one that gave voice to these young women. I wanted her to keep pointing to their pictures, kept saying their names. These are the ones that we should be remembering. We need to do this for them. And that was important to both of us. And also Holland had been approached about doing another true crime, playing a detective, and it fell through. And I think this just landed on her lap at the right time. So it was a kind of a combination of all those things. But I really appreciated her grit and her humanity.
Now, I'm curious. We're in a bit of a true crime sort of resurgence right now, and
Yeah.
I'm always kind of fascinated, sort of why there's such a demand for it now. And as someone who's sort of been diving into the middle of it, I'm kind of curious. What do you think? Why do you think now is the collective zeitgeist sort of wants sort of that appetite for sort of what was? Is it just sort of a
Hmm.
separation because we really haven't had sort of a sort of grand scale mass, boogeyman, American boogeyman, quote unquote, since
Yeah.
Dahmer, really.
Right. Right. Although there's a case that's going on now that's really troubling on Long Island. This Long Island serial killer still hasn't been found, and
Oh,
he's been
geez.
killing these young women prostitutes really and dumping their bodies along the beaches of Long Island for several years now. And it's really, really disturbing. And I just wonder if our bandwidth is just so full of violence and destruction on a day-to-day basis now that almost this stuff seems like a footnote, as horrible as that sounds, that when these murderers are lurking about, it's almost like, well, another one, and I think that we've become immune to so much of it. And I think that's what's so troubling to me. And I feel like maybe part of the reason for this interest is that we need something to shake us up and especially now that we've been in the past, year plus been essentially quarantined in our own little bubbles. I think people are afraid. And I feel like in a way, these documentaries, these films allow us to express that fear in a safe way. And certainly there's never been a thought in my mind ever in any project I've ever done where like, let's exploit these poor victims. Let's, do something that's going to make them into, whatever, just bowling pins to be knocked down. I never, ever, I look at each one as being in a way kind of a record of what they suffered, and what their families lost. I think that's the thing that's always in my mind, at least certainly in the back of my mind, as we're telling these stories. And I think that we as a society, I think we've become sort of immune to violence, but I think we're also endlessly fascinated with the minds of people who commit it. And for what reason, I don't know.
No, and I mean, you're right. I mean, it's important to sort of give context and sort of understand sort of the real human costs that these
Hmm.
people had, because I mean, on one end, if you look at sort of the fictionalized, Dexter Morgans of the world and put him beside
Right.
Ted Bundy, Dexter looks like Barney the dinosaur.
Right, right. And again, I'm a fan of Dexter. I can't wait for the revival. I'm
Me too,
I hope
yeah.
to see what happens. But I think there is there's a delineation there, and I feel like it's one that we need to be aware of. I think certainly somebody making a film like an American Boogeyman, and there's also a new film that chronicles Bundy with Elijah Wood. Which I think is more of a meditation on Bundy's crimes and kind of a psychological kind of cat and mouse between Bundy, the captured Bundy, and one of the FBI agents that went in to interview him. I mean, it looks really interesting to me. But I think that's the reason we as filmmakers keep revisiting these stories is because we're trying to make sense out of where there was never any sense to be made of it. I think we're trying to kind of shed light on evil, not to exploit, but I think to try to understand.
No, I'm with you on that. And I mean, I think just to put a bow on this, because American Boogeyman really does sort of, like I said earlier, give you that sort of other side of the coin, not just
Mm-hmm.
with sort of, being scared and horror in general, but
Mm-hmm.
even the story of Holland's character and just, like you say, we don't hire girls. To think that
Right.
happened as recently as like the late 70s just makes you feel
I
like,
know, I know. And I have to say the real Kathy McChesney came to see the film. We showed it to her. Not necessarily for her seal of approval, but the fact that we got one, and that she was, again, I don't want to put words into her mouth, but it seemed to me that she was impressed. And I think she was touched by the fact that we did include so much of the struggle that she went through as a young detective, but also the challenges of trying to track this monster down when the only computer in the entire office belonged to the
was the
payroll
payroll.
department. And that's all of that is true. She's like, wow, you really got it. She goes, I can tell the research you've done, and I commend you, because all of what you captured here is what it was. And she said even the scene where they told us that it was no longer our jurisdiction, she goes, I didn't necessarily blow up the way she does in the film, but there was that sense of deflation, of loss, of like, oh my God, this is out of our hands now. What are we going to do? And that sense of defeat. So she felt that, and she also, said that she felt that we were mindful of the victims, and making sure that their names were said and remembered. And she felt that that was, something that she really respected and appreciated.
Well, and it speaks to the law enforcement side of things as well, because I mean,
Mhm.
especially when you're having to deal with such heinous crimes,
Right.
you're going to get emotionally involved whether you like it or not. It's not a question of trying to track down a purse thief or a pickpocket. it's
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
it's
Right.
a different level.
Yeah. Yeah. And she did get emotionally involved, and she was, again, this case really meant something to her. And I think that, and there's a line where the boss says, the reason we brought her in was to soften up the witnesses. I mean, again, that's what she was told.
Right.
She had to put up with the guys who would whistle at her. She came off the elevator. She was, there's a photo of her, in her uniform, and she's just this tiny, 5'3" Spitfire, surrounded by these gargantuan guys. So, and there she was. And I think that photo, in a way, was a reminder to me of just what that must have been like for her.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I mean, it's a really fascinating film. And I mean, just thank you again for the time, and thank you
Oh,
for
thanks,
mentioning
David.
Boogeyman, man, because it
Oh,
really also
thanks.
it gives us a look at not just the monster, but sort of the toll that he took from the people in his orbit.
Oh, well, it means a lot, you saying that, because that's really was the intention. So thank you.
All right, cheers, man. Thanks again for the time.
Same to you, David. Take care.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.